become the ones who redefine the global order. 30 years ago, the people of Africa were forced to bow their heads in the mines, not to rebuild after war, but to strip their own land for empires that had withdrawn on the map, yet continue to profit from every breath of this continent. In Ghana, children traded their childhood for gold dust. In Burkina Faso, villagers dug uranium, yet still lit their homes with kerosene. In Congo, young men died in the mud to supply cobalt for phones owned by people who'd never heard the name Kinshasa. The world called it development cooperation, but Africans knew it was legitimized plunder. Today, 8 African nations no longer wait to be summoned. They stepped into Ouagadougou not to beg, not to negotiate, but to pledge allegiance to one man, Ibrahim Traoré, president of a nation once labeled impoverished, now rising, as a symbol of a new world order. He bows to no NATO. He signs no checks for the IMF. He plays no part in the theater of modern colonialism. He said, "If no one will help us rise, then I will be the first to try." Can a small nation like Burkina Faso lead an entire continent? Is this a reckless dream or the awakening long suppressed? And if the world won't make room, can Africa take its place back? If you believe this moment is real, comment below, Africa waits no more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe those once exploited are now rewriting the rules. In Barcelona, they say there are children who were born and grew up inside tents. They have never seen a clay-roofed home, never been registered at birth, never gone to school, never even been called by their real names, only labeled as the displaced. 2 million people forgotten in the very land that birthed them. The Masi call them Na Ton Nibiga children exiled from the womb of the earth. While aid was frozen and summits dragged on endlessly, Traoré stood up and declared, "I will build a city where they are invisible no more." Do you see that as courage or recklessness? Your comment may one day become part of history. The city from Mother Earth, a groundbreaking without foreign money. No groundbreaking ceremony, no international delegates, no live stream, no red ribbons, only a wooden shovel, a cloud of red dust rising from the soil of Kaya, and the sun-scorched hands of those once erased from the map of development. Traoré stood in a circle of the nameless. He gave no speech, raised no slogans. He simply spoke one sentence in Moray: "Za Nyamba Zanga, if they won't give, we build it ourselves." And in that very moment, Traoré City was born. No donors, no UN emergency grants, not a cent from the EU, no trace of US aid. Everything from the architectural design to the last brick was purely Burkinabe. The government discreetly recruited a team of young local architects. Engineers once dismissed for lacking international certification were summoned back. The first blueprint, drawn by hand on recycled paper with annotations in national languages. Each brick was fired from native soil. Each rooftop molded from the ashes of villages burned in conflict. No one outside knew the project was underway. The government sealed all information. No press, no site visits, no panel discussions, because they knew if the world found out too soon, this dream would be strangled in its crib. Traoré issued the command, "This city will be built like a military operation, silent, focused, classified." A former Army engineering unit stationed at the northern border was redeployed to Kaya. All armored vehicles were retrofitted into concrete mixers. Trucks once used to haul munitions now carried stone. Excavators replaced barricades with building foundations. At the same time, local villages were instructed to nominate residents to receive housing. No paperwork, no poverty status required, just verbal confirmation from village elders and griots, the traditional keepers of communal memory. Priority went to widows, the disabled, war veterans, orphan-led households. Selection wasn't based on bureaucratic filters. It was based on memory and dignity. The first to sign for land was Mama Nene, 72 years old, who had lost her home to mercenaries. She had no map, only a memory, 7 steps from where I was born, beneath the shade of my ancestors' baobab tree. A young engineer didn't consult Google Maps. He listened, then sketched her memory by hand. Her house was built exactly there. There is no architecture more modern than loyalty to memory. Each housing cluster followed a community core model featuring a school, a clinic, a local market, a nursery, a playground, a water point, all within a 10-minute walking radius. Streetlights ran on solar energy, water was filtered and reused via underground irrigation, transforming every housing unit into a food garden. For the first time, children had books to read, beds with mattresses, and light to dream beyond the boundaries of a tent. Issouf, 29, a young engineer who once worked for a European corporation, said, "In Europe, I was just a doorman in a company. Here I'm building an entire city. Workers were paid fair wages, served 3 meals a day, and slept on solid wooden beds. There were no supervisors shouting, no surveillance cameras, only the beat of the djembe drum every morning, summoning them to the site like a ritual of rebirth. When international agencies began to sense something was happening, they asked, 'Who's funding this project?' Burkina Faso answered simply, 'The sweat of our people and the wisdom of our ancestors.' France grew suspicious. The EU sent warnings. The IMF threatened to downgrade the country's credit rating. Traoré didn't respond. He simply dispatched a troupe of traditional artists to perform outside Western embassies. Their play was titled, "The Village Owes No One." When the foundation of Zone 3 was complete, thousands of people from Barcelogho, Kongusi, and Tugun arrived not to observe, but to volunteer. One man said, "I used to have no homeland. If this city is for the displaced, then let me lay 1 brick for myself." It was no longer just a construction project. It became a movement of restored dignity. No one called them homeless anymore. They had a new name, Guardians of the Land, and for the first time in their lives, they no longer felt forgotten. Or, if you were a citizen of Burkina Faso, would you choose to leave in search of foreign aid, say, or stay and build a city with your own hands? Leave a comment, because sometimes your words today become the stories tomorrow we'll remember. The world panics over a city that needs no aid. When the first images of Traoré City leaked to the public, many thought they were CGI, a 3D model, a digital fantasy, not something real, certainly not in a country that had just emerged from civil conflict. A city that was clean, orderly, colorful, standing proudly in the middle of what the world calls a red zone on the aid map. And even more shocking, the entire project was built without a single dollar of international aid. Western media quickly shifted from silence to suspicion. Article after article rolled out with icy headlines. The mysterious city in Burkina Faso, who's really behind it, is Traoré, building a hidden military camp. In Brussels, a closed-door emergency meeting was held between EU officials and international aid organizations. An internal 86-page report ended with one sentence: "If this model spreads, it will seriously threaten Western influence across Africa." The IMF sent a formal letter demanding Burkina Faso disclose its funding sources. The World Bank called for a fiscal risk assessment. US aid publicly warned This project lacks international oversight and may pose human rights concerns. Burkina Faso's response, nothing. At a packed press conference in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré didn't read a statement. He simply held up the blueprint of a government-distributed home and said, if this is what they call a human rights violation, then let me violate it again and again until every citizen has a roof over their head. The world stood stunned, not because Traoré defied power, but because his words struck a nerve, a moral nerve the world had long abandoned. Some Western NGOs quietly pressured local material suppliers, attempting to break the supply chain. Multinational companies canceled contracts with Burkinabe manufacturers, citing lack of ISO certification or non-compliance with global standards. Meanwhile, financial institutions launched silent retaliation, credit lines were slashed, the country's credit rating was downgraded, Burkina Faso was added to the high investment risk list. But Traoré had anticipated it all. He ordered the creation of a new business alliance, the League of Those Who Don't Sign IMF Papers. Every member pledged 3 things: no foreign loans, no contracts with companies funded by Western aid, never let profit come before dignity. The movement spread like wildfire across the Sahel. In Mali architecture, students sent letters requesting to volunteer in Kaya. In Niger, engineers offered to transfer water filtration tech completely free. In Togo, young people biked into the city to plant trees. No pay, no credit. They simply said, we too were once forgotten. In Washington, a special council was convened. A senior strategist warned, this isn't just about housing. This is a declaration of independence from the aid structure. If it works, Africa may no longer need our money. Some Western diplomats issued subtle threats. If Traoré doesn't soften, his stance ed will be suspended. Burkina Faso replied with a statement written in Moré Dioula Fulani in English, if the price of aid is submission, then we choose self-reliance. And instead of being crushed, Traoré became the face of a new movement, urban sovereignty. In Dakar, Kigali, Addis Ababa, the phrase Traoré urbanism began surfacing at development conference. No longer urbanization by Western template, but cities built through ancestral memory, community design, and popular ownership. A group of European scholars released a risk assessment. This model threatens transparency since African nations would no longer report to us. Burkina Faso's Ministry of Communication responded publicly on their official website, transparency is when our people know where they live, not when foreign officials know how we spend our money. Western reactions grew more intense. The Financial Times labeled Traoré a new populist in African form. The Guardian wrote, a city could start a war. Meanwhile, every single day in Burkina Faso, thousands flocked to the new city, not to beg for housing, but to witness life being built by real human hands. One elderly man fell to his knees in front of his home and wept. I thought I would die in a tent, but now I will die with a roof above me and my name carved on the door. A 9-year-old boy stood outside his classroom and whispered to his teacher, Miss, is this really my house? No one's coming to kick us out anymore, right? And that is why the world is afraid. Not because Burkina Faso built homes, but because Burkina Faso shattered an entire dependency system using bricks and belief, AGE. What do you think when an entire continent has been kept under a microscope, but for the first time, chooses to build a future that doesn't require approval? If you believe that development should not require permission, drop a comment below. The Invisible War and the Awakening of a People. When the first houses in Traoré City lit up with water running children, laughing classrooms full, the world remains silent. No congratulations from the United Nations, no statement from the IMF or World Bank. Not a single positive headline in Western media. Only one thing changed, the grip tightened. SWIFT, the global banking system, began obstructing transactions related to construction materials from Burkina Faso. Logistics companies abruptly suspended shipments from Kaya to neighboring countries. A shipment of eco-bricks sent to Togo was rejected. The official reason fails to meet sustainability standards under international aid framework. NGOs previously active in the Kaya region were advised to withdraw foreign staff due to security concerns. Western news outlets began seeding doubt. Who's really behind this model? Could a foreign power be funding it? Traoré, reformer, or global disruptor? A foreign journalist arrived to film in Kaya. But before she could roll the camera, it was confiscated, not by officials, but by the people. A frail old woman raised her cane, pointed straight at the lens, and said, "You only come when we're starving. Now that we're full, you find it dangerous." In Brussels, a closed-door EU session convened. One MP stood up and warned, "That city is becoming a symbol. If we don't act, we'll lose the entire region." Weeks later, the internet in Traoré City was cut. State television could no longer broadcast the story of the project. Social media accounts posting about the city were flagged as misinformation. Videos were removed for community guideline violations. Burkina Faso filed official complaints. No reply. Traoré called a closed meeting with his tech team. Only one sentence was written on the board: "We'll build our own network." 3 months later, a local internet infrastructure was born, powered by national satellites and fiber systems engineered by students at the University of Ouagadougou. Traoré declared, "If our voices aren't allowed in their world, then we'll build a new one." Meanwhile, in New York, an international conference on sustainable urban development was held. Not a single word mentioned Traoré City. Instead, an award was given to a resettlement model in Haiti, where people still live in tents, waiting for the next aid package from the World Bank. At a press conference in Paris, when asked about Traoré City, the French president simply shrugged. "That's not a city. It's a political stunt in disguise." Hours later, hundreds of Burkinabés marched in Marseille. Their signs read, "If this is politics, at least it gave us a home." In Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, the hashtag number Build Like Traoré began to spread. Architecture students shared free schematics inspired by the city. Engineers in Ethiopia built open source tools to map cities from memory. In South Africa, the first urban autonomy conference was held without foreign sponsorship. And what baffled the West most was this Traoré never tried to promote himself. No talk shows, no media campaigns, no flashy declarations. He simply stood behind the workers, sometimes holding bricks. Saturday, in schoolyards, listening to students recite poetry in Moray. The city spoke for him. And that is what made it uncontrollable. A major development bank offered emergency investment to expand the model. Burkina Faso declined. A humanitarian foundation offered $200 million to improve supply logistics. They declined again. Traoré replied, "If independence cannot be bought with blood, then it should never be sold for money." And then the invisible war escalated. A fire broke out at the main cement warehouse. The central solar station was sabotaged. A cyber attack targeted the city's civil records database. All in the same week, no one was arrested. No one claimed responsibility. But the people knew the battle had begun. During a nighttime community gathering, while the entire city stood in blackout, Traoré stepped onto the platform, lit only by the stars. "If they break one brick, we will lay 10 more. If they cut our power, we'll light the fire with our hands. If they silence our network, then our voices will rise until the world is forced to listen. And they did. With light, thousands of people turned on flashlights from old cell phones. No cameras, no journalists, only faith radiating in beams of human determination. The city lit up with a light no one could ever shut off. One. So where will you stand with those who build in the dark, or with those who light it up just to control it? Leave your comment, because one day history will ask who stood witness. The truth hidden in a dusty drawer. No one expected it. While global media rushed to label Traoré City a fantasy or impossible dream, in a small, forgotten office on the 7th floor of the United Nations headquarters, a rusted drawer was pulled open for the first time in nearly 8 years. Inside was a 12-page document, black and white, no cover, no seals, no special markings. The title read, Proposal for Rapid Urban Model for the Sahel Region, 2017 author Ibrahim Traoré. At the time, a mid-level logistics officer, unknown, unheard, invisible. The proposal had been submitted to UN Habitat, World Bank, African Union Development Agency. Its contents, exactly what is being built today. A city independent of foreign aid, built with local materials, housing for displaced populations, integration of education, healthcare, and food systems into architecture, operated by communities, not by donors. On the final page, scrawled in blue pen, italicized by hand, one line stood alone. Do not give us money. Give us room to build. The proposal was rejected. The reasons clearly stated: unrealistic, fails to meet financial standards, no eligible implementing partners, lacks Western-aligned feasibility, no response, no publication, no recognition. No one believed him. The file was labeled unreviewed, not recommended for funding. And that was it. A locked drawer, a forgotten man, a vision buried because it didn't fit the system. And Traoré, he said nothing. No protest, no appeal, no rewriting. He simply returned home and began laying the first brick without a single cent of support. Nearly a decade later, that dusty proposal wasn't just fulfilled, it was surpassed. Not because it was permitted, but precisely because it was denied. The day that drawer opened again was the day the global establishment began to understand. Traoré City wasn't a rebellion. It was Plan B, the one they had thrown away. In a private meeting in New York, a senior UN official whispered, "We could have walked with him, but now he's already ahead of us." ADE. What about you? If the world turned its back on you, if your idea was buried in dust and dismissal, would you give up? Or would you turn that rejection into a road for millions to walk? Leave a comment. Because sometimes your one sentence becomes the light for someone who thought they were forgotten. One city, one philosophy, one continent awakening. Burkina Faso has no space station, no aircraft carriers, no veto power at the UN Security Council. But the day children once born and raised in refugee tents were handed keys to their own homes, the world began to tremble. Not because Traoré built a city, but because he didn't need them to do it. New loans, new foreign aid, new emergency humanitarian packages, just sweat, faith, and a silent vow: if no one comes to help my people, then I will be the first. In less than a year, over 2,000 permanent homes were handed over in Traoré City, not temporary shelters, not rented spaces, but real ownership. People once labeled invisible a humanitarian burden now became legal owners of a piece of their motherland. The schools in the city don't use imported textbooks. They use stories written from memory, where children learn about their clans, their villages, their forgotten histories. Here, no one asks, what's your grade? They ask, what will you do to make your village better? Health clinics run 24/7 powered by the sun. Access to water is no longer a luxury, it's a right. Food markets don't float with speculation, they're coordinated by local councils. And for the first time, there's a city where people are called by their native names, not the name of a foreign donor. An African Union delegation visited. No motorcades, no state dinners, just grilled fish okra leaves and children singing in Fulani. At the end, they wrote in their report, this is not just a city. This is a political declaration made of bricks and smiles. For the first time, Africa doesn't need permission to live with dignity. In Mali, a new township is being modeled after the Traoré blueprint. In Niger, younger architects call their projects bricks against slavery. In South Africa, the movement Land is a Right, Not a Gift is spreading. And in Burkina Faso itself, those who once quietly walked behind aid trucks are now building schools with their own savings. They don't need certificates, just a hand-painted sign, we were once forgotten, not anymore. And so you might ask, can one small city shake an entire continent? Can one brick placed in the right spot collapse a whole system of dependency? The answer isn't in reports. It's not in budgets. It's in roof tiles laid by village hands. The eyes of a child finally called by their true name. The silence of those who once ruled with money, but now can't buy an inch of dignity. We were taught, to be sovereign, you must be powerful. You must be rich. You must be recognized. But maybe sovereignty doesn't begin with power. It begins with refusal, refusing to bow, refusing to borrow for validation, refusing to live temporarily on your own land. And you reading this now, if you are African, will you lay your first brick for your own city? If you are not, will you dare to ask yourself again, what is development and who gets to define it? Leave a comment, because your words today might become the first brick of a tomorrow that no longer needs permission. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share. For an Africa that will not sleep, for a future not written by someone else, for a city, though small, that made the world too afraid to look away,